Hello, I decided to create this video to show you how I use the action that I'm sending you to process my images, to kind of give my images the final look that I'm usually after, and also to explain what that look is, so that you kind of have an idea of the vision behind this whole thing. So the bottom line is that I used to shoot film, and I like the way film renders images more than digital. I'm not a huge fan of very contrasty images. So my processing essentially attempts to reduce the overall contrast in the image by boosting the shadows and actually drawing down the highlights. But at the same time, I don't like the trendy like flat images that are super popular now with like VSCO and things like that. I'm looking for an image that still has internal contrast, but not at the large image level. I would like the contrast to be more like the micro contrast that is between different items in the photo. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that by just showing you a fun example photo. Just a photo from a birthday party. I just picked this one at random because cute kid. Anyway, so this is the photo essentially, I guess, out of camera. Just basic processing. I had added grain, so this will kind of introduce highly processed grain when we run the action. I now decided not to do that. I prefer to add the grain afterwards because otherwise it gets a little too grainy. But just to kind of get an idea, this is the original image, and this here is the processed image. Again, don't worry about the grain. I do think that this is a little bit much here. But look at the overall image. This is the original. This is the processed. Again, original, processed. The two areas that you might want to focus on are the genes. Notice how the dark areas of the genes are actually darker in the original and lighter in the processed. Darker in the original, lighter in the processed. Also, now look at his shirt and notice how the shirt is lighter in the original, darker in the processed. Lighter in the original, darker in the processed. So I try to shoot the photos so that I retain highlight detail in what I want to have detail. In fact, you'll probably see that some of the photos that I will be sending from both the D3S and the D800 will probably be kind of shockingly underexposed, and that's because of how those sensors work. They actually respond very well to pushing the shadows. So in order to retain as much information on the highlights, I'm kind of forced to shoot the shots a little bit on the underexposed side. Again, I will talk to you about it when I do that. But yeah, the goal here is I want to have that filmy, enormous amount of detail in the highlights that, again, is typical of film and is not usually found in digital photos. At the same time, as I mentioned, I don't like a completely flat image, so you can see that even though I have, in fact, reduced the contrast in the overall image, I think that this photo qualifies as a fairly contrasty image. And the reason why it does is because I actually introduce something that is often referred to as micro contrast, which means that while you don't have the big amount of contrast at the image level, there's contrast between close areas. So if you look at the genes, there's actually, if you look here, the light area of the genes and the dark area, there's actually more contrast in my processed image than the original. It just is how it is. You can kind of see in the stitching of the genes, it's much more evident. That's not just because it was lightened. It's actually because, again, the contrast was increased. Clearly, the image is also sharpened by the action, which you'll see. And also, in this case, I'm just going to show you how to do it on one image. The way I normally do the workflow is I just basically go through the images, I cull them. I then, whatever the selects are, I do color correction, just basic color correction to basically get an image kind of like this out of it, exposure and color correction. Again, paying attention to retain information on the highlights, because if you feed this to Photoshop without information on the highlights, you're dead in the water. And usually what I'll then do is export them as 16-bit files. Export all of them from Lightroom as 16-bit files. And then I just basically pull them all into Photoshop and run that action on them. And the action is relatively quick running. This is, ideally for something like a blog post or an album or ordered prints. For like a full wedding, I've done it, but in that case I did the automate, where basically the action gets pulled out and run on every image. The image gets opened, it runs the action, it saves it, opens, runs the action and saves it, because otherwise it's just crazy. In that case, those are just kind of the images to show the client. If they end up buying an album, that I haven't pre-designed, I will probably go back and revisit the non-process images, because when the action is run in this automated batch mode, I don't get to do the dodging and burning that I usually do. Anyway, so let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to take this the unedited image. Oh, by the way, here's a black and white. Black and white, similar kind of intent. Here's the original. Here's the black and white. As you see, the dark area of the jeans are actually lighter. The lighter areas of the shirt are about the same. Because, yeah, for the black and whites, for whatever reason, I actually kind of like the idea of letting the whites go a little hotter. So you'll see when I open the action, you'll see that it leaves an exposure adjustment that actually pumps up the highlights a little. Can be disabled. In some cases I do disable it, and I'll show you how I do that. So again, so we're back at the original image. I'm just going to go ahead and do edit in Photoshop. So it's opening the image. I'm going to do render using Lightroom. Again, normally I would export all these as 16-bit files or whatever, and then pull them in. Okay, so here's the image in Photoshop. I'm going to go to my actions, and here it is. We're going to go to my color work action and run it, and you should see here kind of what it's doing. It's going to go a little fast. I'm going to hide this actions panel in the meantime. And there you have it. It's done. It basically did 99% of the work that I will normally do on the image, which is kind of really nice. Let me open this layer panel, because there'll be something to show you. So yeah, it's mostly done. As you'll see, there's a group here that's black and white that's disabled by default. You can go ahead and enable it, and there you have the black and white image. As I mentioned, there's this exposure adjustment that actually pumps the image. Notice how when I disable it, you get kind of a level that's about more equivalent to the color image. See that? For some reason, I decided to pump the highlights. Again, you could disable that or whatnot. So let's just look at the color version again. This is the file, and for most of the images, especially if they're not like ordered, if it's just like a blog post or whatever, and it's not a super significant image, I will just deliver it as you see it. However, as you can see here, the action sets up a few layers for me: dodge, burn, paint with light, paint with dark, that I use. So let me show you how I use them. I go ahead and use a paintbrush tool, which is already selected. I typically have a largish brush. I can control the size of the keyboard. And I usually like to operate at about 100% opacity and a flow that's under 15%. That's typically my favorite, my preference. And what I do is I paint in the mask for these adjustment layers. I like all my edits to be undoable. I like them to be, you can reduce the opacity of them and whatnot. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now here, I'm going to just kind of burn around this little boy, and then I'm going to dodge him a little, brighten him up, just to kind of show you. So what I would do is I would go to the burn layer. Since this is black, I'm going to paint with white, which is already pre-selected, and there I am. I'm painting with black. It's subtle. I mean, the idea is for this to be subtle. You can see it's getting painted. Now, if you wanted it stronger, notice that the layer is set to 50% opacity. I can certainly increase it, and that's more, but I typically like to have the things be subtle. Now I'm going to go into the dodge. I'm going to brighten him. I'm going to shrink the paintbrush size and just brighten him a little. That's it. Again, very subtle, but if you turn it on and off, you can see the difference. And that's it. And this might be a deliverable image. Now, I just want to point out one quick thing. I'm going to turn these off. I have two options for doing this kind of dodging and burning. Sometimes I use them together. Sometimes I use one or the other. One is to use the dodge and burn. And again, if you want to undo some of it, you can just kind of, I use the keyboard. I do X. If you notice here, this shifts the color. So now it goes to black. Like I can paint in the dodge layer. See how it's painted with white? And now I'm going to do this. See, it's undoing. It's undoing the effect, which is kind of neat. So I can do it and undo it. It's infinitely editable. That's kind of what I like about this. There's no difference. All right, so anyway, so I can do it using the dodge and burn, or I can use the paint with dark and paint with light. These are just two layers. As you can see, they have a little bit of a tone to them. And again, I don't touch this. I go on the mask, and I'm going to paint here. This paints with dark. And the difference in this burn is that it's burning with a kind of a burgundy. So it's adding a little bit of color. It's not only burning, but again, it's burning with a color. Same thing with this lightens, but again, it's basically adding like a cream. And if I did this, I might want to tone it down a little. And it's completely a choice. Do you want to burn with a little bit of adding a warmth, or do you want to burn just basically a gray burn? It's completely choice. I do it depending on the image, and they're both valid. That's about it. I've basically explained what the intent is. And again, these edits apply to the higher levels because the black and white is essentially just, applying its work to whatever's below. So notice when I enable and disable these paint with light, or maybe even more so the paint this, notice, see how it's applying? So it's kind of cool. You can edit the image and then you can convert it to black and white and whatnot. Sometimes, keep in mind that this is just a generic color mix. This is done with adjustments layers. You can certainly go in and change how the black and white is being applied. In this case, I'm using a black and white gradient. It could be done with a black and white adjustment layer. I've done that at times. Complete freedom and whatnot. You'll be able to see what all these things do. Add a little bit of a gray back in and whatnot. Alright, so if you have any questions, please give me a call. Obviously, in order to do this, you'll need to have the actions. But I hope this was useful, and help you create images that are a little closer to what I'd like them to be like. And thank you.